Morning everyone, this is just a quick video on how to stretch watercolor paper. If you're unsure as to whether or not that's something that you need to do, then keep watching. If it's something that you've tried to do but have found the results a little bit erratic, then also keep watching and I'll show you a few tips and techniques that work for me. I've just finished painting a full imperial size scene of the River Arun in Sussex, and it's stretched out on this board, and I do that for all of my gallery paintings and my commissions so that I've got a nice tight piece of paper. I know that it's not going to buckle when I start putting down a lot of wet paint, glazing, wet into wet underpainting. I know it's not going to start rippling and giving me undulations and problems that could arise as I continue with the painting. What I've got here is a half sheet of Millford paper, and I'm going to stretch that as well, and that'll be ready for me to work on tomorrow. So I'm going to show you how I do that. So I'm just going to soak this in some water. It then expands as it gets wet. Once I take it out and put it on the board and tape it to the board, it starts to dry and it contracts and tightens up, and then you've got a wonderful flat surface that won't buckle when you come to paint on it. I should say that the reason I do this is because I work very wet when I paint, and I use very, very extensive glazing, certainly in my larger paintings, and I want the surface to remain flat. If you don't paint like that, then maybe you don't need to go through this process. I've got here a watercolor block, and it's gummed or glued on all four sides, and when you paint on it, of course it gets wet, and depending on how wet your washes are, it can start to buckle a little bit, but it tends to dry up and contract again given that it's bound on all four sides. For me it buckles quite heavily, and there's no contest between this and a beautifully stretched out piece of paper. But if you don't work that way, then don't go through the process that I'm going to show you, because make life easier for yourself. Stretching paper isn't necessarily straightforward. So if you can get by with working on a block or just a piece of paper taped to the board without having it stretched, then fine. Do what works best for you. Don't do it because I do it. I do it because it works for me. But if you don't paint that way, then it'd be a crazy thing to do, to adopt a process that perhaps you don't need to. Just a couple of quick things to say. I find that no matter what the quality of the paper, whether it's 100% cotton or 100% pulp or something in between, the way that I paint, the paper buckles unless I stretch it. And I've tried pretty much all the major brands across the different range of qualities, and it all seems to buckle to a certain extent when I put heavy washes down. Also, heavier weight paper, and I paint normally in 140-pound weight, even 200-pound paper, and I use 200-pound Saunders Waterford quite a lot, that will buckle to the way that I paint, and so I even stretch out 200-pound paper. You might think it's unnecessary. I'm just going by my experience. So let's have a look at the painting that I have just finished. This piece of paper, it's a piece of Langton Prestige Rough, 100% cotton, gorgeous quality paper. It was soaked in water for about 5 minutes and then taped to the board on all four sides and allowed to dry. That then allows the paper to tighten up as it dries, and it means that this is as tight as a drum. I don't know if you can see this, but I'm pressing down on the surface of the paper, and it's only just touching the board underneath. There's a lot of spring in there. The tension has probably slightly curled the board, but it's beautiful to paint on, and I need it to be like this because on a large painting here where I'm using a very, very wet technique with a large brush, I'm sloshing paint and, well, I'm sloshing water on initially, I'm then painting into it to get this lovely uniform smooth sky. The same thing's happening here with the water. A number of glazes are put onto this to achieve the effect in the water. And unless this paper is stretched to the board, I'm not going to get that smoothness in the sky. What happens is, if I just put this on the board without stretching it, the paper would get very wet and start to buckle, and it becomes undulated, and I'd start to put across my blue and my Naples yellow here to get this lovely flat sky. But what happens is the pigment then starts to run before it dries into the undulations in the paper. And if you're not careful, you can have a very subtly striped sky with vertical stripes, and it just doesn't look right. So I want to avoid that at all costs. It spoils the effect of the peaceful river and the crisp morning and that lovely flat sky. The paper must be flat, so stretching it solves that problem for me. Now this is exactly the same paper in a watercolour block, and it's gummed on all four sides, so the paper is to an extent stretched out, but it isn't really. If I started to paint very wet on this piece of paper, it would soon start to buckle. That's not a fault of De La Rowney, it's not a fault of Langton Prestige paper. It's the same with all blocks. I've tried pretty much all of them. If you work really wet, they will buckle. Doesn't matter that they're gummed on all four sides. And the obvious point to state is that if you're going to make a painting this size, you ain't going to get a block that's big enough to do that anyway. So you might as well learn how to stretch your paper. One of the common objections to stretching watercolour paper is that once you've stuck this gummed paper down to stretch the paper in the first place, you can't get it off again. Well, for me, that's never an issue. I don't need to get this off because this painting is going to be framed, it's going to go to a gallery, and I'll put one of these on top, a mount or a mat, however you refer to it. And I've simply cut the painting out of its surround, and there will be a margin of, I don't know, half an inch or so of brown tape around the edge. It doesn't matter. You can't see it. So while my piece of Millford is soaking, let me show you what you need. You need a nice sturdy board. This is just a piece of plyboard. I've had it for years. It's brilliant for the job. And you don't need to spend silly money on this. I just got this from the local timber company. I use some water, a cellulose sponge, and then this is the key thing, this heavy duty gummed paper. Now you can get a number of brands where, how shall I say, the quality isn't quite so good. It's just not robust enough. This needs to be decent, thick gummed paper. I get it in a big roll like this, and I'm just going to need 4 bits of that. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. So I've got my pieces of gummed paper ready. Let's just move them out the way. And let's go and get the paper and let's get started. So here it is. Here's my wet piece of paper. I haven't dried it off. Some people say, oh, you should keep aside a towel and blot the surface before you put it down on the board. Well, good luck with keeping a special towel that's completely free of dust, fluff, hairs, anything else. It's just, it doesn't seem to happen. So I gave that method up a long time ago, and just take it out of the bath. That's what I do, is I run a couple of inches of water in the bath. Make sure your bath is clean and not full of whatever products you decide to wash yourself in, because that doesn't have a good effect on the surface of your paper. So clean bath, let it soak in there. This has had about 5 minutes. For £140 paper or 300 GSM, that's perfect. It doesn't need to be any longer than that. So get the piece of paper where you want on the board. You need to ensure that the board is completely clear of anything underneath that could affect the flat surface. Then what I like to do is I get a piece of kitchen paper and just dry off about 1 to 2 centimetres around the edge. It's where I'm going to stick the gummed paper, because if this is too wet, you then run into a problem potentially with your gummed paper not being able to adhere and stick. Now that's dry enough for the tapes to adhere better. So get your first piece. I don't know why, but I usually start with a long piece along the bottom. Have a sponge. You don't want it absolutely wringing wet with water, but there's got to be a decent amount in there. And this is why I say you've got to practice it, because I cannot show you how wet this is or how dry it is. It's just not possible. So you need to have a go at it for yourself. Then I get my piece of tape, put the sponge on top, and just draw the tape through while pressing on the sponge. And you can see it's now glossy, but it's not too wet, it's not soaking, and it will mean that when I put this on the paper, it's going to adhere to it and stay stuck. I then go back to my paper towel and just press down the edge of the paper, the edge of the tape, I should say. And I'm doing this because I don't want to get greasy fingers anywhere near the surface of the paper, nor do I want to scratch it, because while the paper's damp, it is at its most vulnerable. And you have to keep that surface pristine. So we repeat this with the other 3 sides. Get a little bit more water, but squeeze it out. And you want to stick about a centimetre and a half over the edge of the paper. Please excuse the noises. And then our last tape on this side. About there. Now that I'm happy that that's stuck down, I use what has to be one of the most important pieces of equipment in the studio. It's just a broken piece of one of the twins' rulers. Actually, I think it's Heidi's because I can see her name on it. It's so important that I broke it a few months ago and glued it again because I need this for my paper stretching. And it's because, I don't know, it's just got a flat edge, but there's a little round corner here, almost a bit like a credit card. And what I do is I will then run this across the top of the tape, and the little rounded corner means that it's not going to scratch the paper. and I'll just run this down the tape here. You don't want to press too hard, otherwise you'll start to squeeze some of the dissolved gum out onto your paper, which is less than ideal. And I'm just running this along where the gummed paper is on top of my piece of Millford. It's just going to help it adhere even better. Do you know, this may not even be necessary, but I do it because it gives me consistent results. And I just know that it works. I know that when I come back to this piece of paper, which will be tomorrow morning, because I let it dry for a good 24 hours, it's going to be as tight as a drum. It's going to be ready to paint on, and we won't have issues of tape peeling up and the paper escaping the constraints that have been put on top of it. It just works. Get yourself a broken ruler. Top tip. So all I need to do now is let this dry in a flat position for 24 hours and I'm ready to get on with the next painting. Well, I hope you found that helpful. That's pretty much all there is to stretching watercolour paper. For me, it's something that I do all the time and it delivers a lot of benefits for me. If you think it will for you too, then have a go. Practice it and you'll soon get the hang of it. Thanks very much for watching. If you liked the video, then click the thumbs up button, please. And to those of you that haven't subscribed, please subscribe to the channel. That helps too. There's a little bell icon next to the subscribe button as well. And if you click on that, then you'll get a notification when my next video comes out. In the meantime, take care. I'll see you next time.